Hey, welcome to the Columbine United weekly podcast, where we are trekking through the book We Make the Road by Walking by Brian McLaren. We are this week on chapter 25. The title of the chapter is Jesus, Violence, and Power. The scripture is Isaiah 42, 1 through 9, Isaiah 53, 1 through 12, and Matthew chapter 16 through 17, verse 9. So let's dive into the book today. Once, Jesus took his disciples on a field trip. There was something he wanted them to learn, and there was a perfect place for them to learn it. So he led them on a 25-mile trek north from their base in Galilee to a city called Caesarea Philippi, a regional center of the Roman Empire. The city was built beside a dramatic escarpment or a cliff face. A famous spring emerged from the base of the cliff. Before Roman occupation, the spring had been known as Panis because it was the center of worship of the Canaanite god Baal, and later for the Greek god Pan. Worshippers carved elaborate niches still visible today in the cliff face. There they placed statues of Pan and other Greek deities. Panis also had a reputation as the site of a devastating military defeat. At Panis, invading armies affiliated with Alexander the Great took the whole region for the Greek Empire. So eventually, the Romans replaced the Greeks, and when their regional ruler Herod the Great died, his son Herod Philip was given control of the region around Panis. He changed the name to Caesarea Philippi. By the first name, he honored Caesar Augustus, the Roman Empire, and by the second name, he honored, well, of course, himself, and distinguished the city from another city named Caesarea Maritima on the coast. The city was, in effect, Philip's Caesarville. Imagine what it would be like to enter Caesarville. It kind of sounds like straight out of Vegas, doesn't it? With Jesus and his team. Today, we might imagine a Jewish leader bringing his followers to Auschwitz, or a Japanese leader to Hiroshima, a Native American leader to Wounded Knee, or a Palestinian leader to the Wall of Separation. There, in the shadow of this cliff face, with its idols set into their finely carved niches, in the presence of all these terrible associations, Jesus asks his disciples a carefully crafted question. Who do people say the Son of Man is? We can imagine that an awkward silence might follow this rather strange and self-conscious question. But soon the answers flow. Well, some people say you're John the Baptist, raised from the dead, and others say Elijah, and still others, Jeremiah, or one of the other prophets. Jesus sharpens the question. So what about you? Who do you say I am? Another silence, and then Peter, the leader among them, speaks. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. It may sound like Peter is making a theological claim with these words, but in this setting, there is much a political statement as a theological one. Christ is the Greek translation for the Hebrew term Messiah, which means the one anointed as a liberating king. To say liberating king anywhere in the Roman Empire would have been dangerous, even more so in a city bearing Caesar's name. By evoking the term Christ, Peter is saying, you are the liberator, promised by God long ago, and one for whom we have long waited. You are King Jesus, who will liberate us from King Caesar. Similarly, Son of the living God takes on an incandescent glow in this setting. Caesars called themselves sons of gods, but Peter's confession asserts that their false idolatrous claim is now trumpeted trumpeted, that's a word, trumpeted by Jesus' true identity is one with authority from the true and living God. The Greek and Roman gods, in their little niches in the cliff face, may be called on to support the dominating rule of the Caesars. But the true and living God stands behind the liberating authority of Jesus. Jesus says that God has blessed Peter with this revelation. He speaks in dazzling terms of Peter's profound role in Jesus' mission. Jesus says the gates of hell will not prevail against their joint project, using a phrase that could aptly be paraphrased: the authority, structures, and control centers of evil. Again, imagine the impact of these words in this politically charged setting. Surely this Caesarville field trip has raised the disciples' hopes and expectations about Jesus to sky-high levels, because Jesus quickly brings them back down to earth. Soon, he says, he will travel north to Jerusalem. There he will be captured, imprisoned, tortured, and killed by the religious and political establishment of their nation, after which he will be raised. Peter appears not to hear the happy ending, only the horrible middle. So he responds just as we would have, with shock and denial. Never, Lord, this shall never happen to you. Do you feel Peter's confusion? Jesus just said that Peter gets it, that Jesus is indeed the liberating king, the revolutionary leader, anointed and authorized by the living God to set the oppressed free. If that's true, then the one thing Jesus cannot do is be defeated. He must conquer and capture, not be conquered and captured. He must torture and kill his enemies, not be tortured and killed by them. And so Peter corrects Jesus. Stop talking this nonsense. This could never happen. Not to you. At that moment, Jesus turns to Peter in one of the most dramatic cases of conceptual whiplash ever recorded in literature anywhere. Jesus says, "Get behind me, Satan." It's a stunning reversal. Jesus has just identified Peter as the blessed recipient of divine revelation. I imagine he's still glowing. And now he identifies Peter as a mouthpiece of the dark side. Jesus has just named Peter as the foundational leader in a movement that will defeat the gates of hell. And now he claims Peter is working on the side of hell. Do you feel the agony of the moment? Like most of his countrymen, Peter knows with unquestioned certainty that God will send a Messiah to lead an armed uprising to defeat and expel the occupying Roman regime and all who collaborate with it. But no, Jesus says, that way of thinking is human, even satanic, the opposite of God's plan. Since the beginning, God has taught that the non-violent will inherit the earth. Violence cannot defend violence. Violence cannot defeat violence. Hate cannot defeat hate. Fear cannot defeat fear. Dominion cannot defeat dominion. God's way is different. God must achieve victory through defeat, glory through shame, strength through weakness, leadership through servanthood, and life through death. The finely constructed mental architecture in which Peter has lived his whole adult life is threatened by this paradoxical message. And it still seems crazy to us in the world. It's counter to the ways of the world. It's not the kind of change of perspective that happens quickly or easily. But isn't that why a master teacher takes students on a field trip? By removing the students from familiar settings, the teacher can dislodge them from conventional thinking. By taking them to a new place, the teacher can help them see from a new vantage point, a new perspective. It was less than a week later that Jesus took 3 of his disciples on another field trip, this time to the top of a mountain. There they had a vision of Jesus shining in glory, conversing with 2 of the greatest leaders in Jewish history. Again, Peter was bold enough to speak up, offering to make 3 shrines to the 3 great men, elevating Jesus to the same elite level as the great liberator Moses and the great prophet Elijah. This time, God's own voice rebuked Peter, as if to say, Moses and Elijah were fine for their time, but my beloved son Jesus is on another level entirely, revealing my true heart in a unique and unprecedented way. Listen to him. Moses the lawgiver and Elijah the prophet, great as they were, differed from Jesus in one important way. They both had engaged in violence in God's name. But in God's name, Jesus would undergo violence, and in so doing, he would overcome it. And that was why, as they came down the mountain, Jesus once again spoke to a suffering, death, and resurrection, a different kind of strategy, a different kind of victory. In many ways, we're all like Peter. We speak with great insight one minute, and we make complete fools of ourselves the next. We're clueless about how many of our pious and popular assumptions are actually illusions. We don't know how little we know, and we have no idea how many of our ideas are wrong. Like Peter, we may use the right words to describe Jesus, Christ, Son of living God, but we still don't understand his heart, his wisdom, his way. But that's okay. Peter is still learning, and so are we. After all, life with Jesus is one big field trip that we're taking together. So let us continue on in this journey as we come alive to the truth about the person of Jesus. So here we are at the end of chapter 25. One of the questions was, how do you respond to this interpretation of the Caesarville field trip? The Activate question is, look for situations this week when your initial reactions should have been questioned, especially in relation to power dynamics. I think for me, this idea of field trips and contrast and comparison is so true when I think about cross-cultural experiences and opportunities to come alive to the reality of different people's lives. For me as a youth growing up in a church community that was committed to service trips, I've had the opportunity to go serve in rural Jamaica, in impoverished places in Mexico, Indian reservations, inner city trips. And in each of these field trips, if we call them, there were moments where my faith was stretched, my understanding of what it is to be a person of faith in a world that is broken and hurt, to see the haves and the have-nots, to see the poor and disfranchised in different settings, changed my heart and changed my life. It opened my eyes to see things from a way that I would have never seen them if I had not had those experiences. So I'm thankful for this idea of the field trips and the people that I've gotten to go on with journeys. I also realized that even walking through this book in a community where we're in small groups and talking about it, I get to learn from 7 other people who challenge my perspective through opening their own hearts and views and minds and questions. And we learn so much together. this ability to be wrong, this ability to be curious, this ability to change our mind. What an amazing and humbling gift it is in our lives to be in this dynamic process of growth. There's so much aliveness through growth, and that is what I find myself thankful for today. Permission that I don't have to have it all figured out, but that I get to continue to show up and learn with others who are on this journey. Hey, thanks for being with us today. Thanks for spending these 15 minutes, and we will catch up with you next time. Have a great week.